Hi, I'm Dr. Lyndon Walker. Welcome to my YouTube channel. I have been using R for 25 years, and today I wanted to share some of the tips and tricks that I've found have been really useful, both for me way back when I learned, but particularly for all of the people that I have taught how to use R over the years. Here are some things that are really helpful. Okay, so number one is use RStudio. This is almost a redundant tip these days. RStudio is almost universal, and most getting started courses and videos and things like that will tell you to install RStudio as well as R. But if whatever resources you're using don't do this, you should definitely be using RStudio. Packages everything together really nicely. You can see your help, you can see your files, you can see your packages. It just makes life much easier. Number two, and this is one that most people learn very quickly. It only takes 1 or 2 times. R is case sensitive. So if you are an absolute beginner, you're typing in some code, it's not working, one of the first things to check is the case, particularly things like L's versus 1's versus I's, those letters that look similar. And this is the case with your variables as well. So your data that you're working with, making sure that whatever you are referring to, you are using the same case that has been stored in your data. Tip number 3 is to comment your code. Even if you are not writing code for anyone but yourself, just think about your future self. Your future self is really going to appreciate some notes saying, this is what I did here. Sometimes you might write code, you might come back to it a long time in the future, and it just is such a time saver. In addition to that, when you comment your code, it means you need to think a little bit more deeply about what's happening in your code. So you'll need to be able to explain it to yourself now, and it'll also make life easier in the future. Speaking of your code and reusing it, something that's a really good idea is to start creating an archive of useful code snippets. So there's going to be actions that you will want to do quite regularly. And rather than having to type them out and rethink them and work them out all over again, instead what you can do is just have an archive where all of those really useful bits and pieces are stored. Number 5. So number 5 is to curate a set of R resources and also people who know R. So this can be on places like Twitter and LinkedIn, it can be on YouTube, it can be websites and blogs, wherever you find useful, good information about R, and also start to develop that network of people where they are creating content, telling you about R, doing useful things that you can learn from, and also hopefully be able to reach out. So for instance, on Twitter, the hashtag #RStats, if you ask a question and tag hashtag #RStats, quite often you'll just get a friendly stranger come along and answer things for you. So number 6, on the topic of resources, something that's really important is to check the date. R has been around for a long time. I've been using it for 25 years. There is resources that are out there, and this applies a lot to Stack Overflow and those help forums as well. There are functions that are no longer the right way to do things. So sometimes you might see this is how to do something. When you type it into R, you might get an error message. More often though, you might get a warning message saying this function or this way of doing things has been replaced or superseded by something better. So what I would try and do is always take a look at the date that something has been posted and try to generally work with the newer ones. And that way there's less risk that you are going to be using functions or using code that is no longer the most efficient way of doing things. If you are using R for your work or your study, something I'd really encourage you to do is form what's called a community of practice. So I'm going to make another video which is just explicitly about the community of practice. But a community of practice is a group of people normally of a very similar skill level who are all learning together. And by helping and teaching each other, you learn a lot more and a lot faster. Sometimes, particularly if this is done formally in a workplace or in a university, you might have a facilitator or a mentor who knows a little bit more. But even then, their job is not really to teach you other than when you get really stuck. It's really just to be a guide, to give you some helpful suggestions, things to look at, And then collectively, those of you who are learning are the ones that do the figuring out and the teaching. Okay, number 8. So number 8 is don't just follow the recipe. So what does this mean? We will often see code or lessons where it's really formulated like a recipe. Step 1, do this. Step 2, do this. Step 3, do this. So for me as a statistician, I will often have people come to me and they're very confused because they had a recipe and they followed it, and what they've got at the end of the recipe doesn't make sense. And I'll ask them some questions, and sometimes they'll say things like, well, you know, I didn't know how much tomato sauce to put on my chocolate chip cookies. And it's because they were following a recipe for one thing and that wasn't appropriate for the other thing that they needed to do. So whenever we're doing any kind of coding or analysis, we want to try and understand what we're doing and not just follow a recipe. Number 9 is to get feedback on your work. So try and find a mentor or someone that can have a look and give you feedback, whether it's on your coding or your statistical analysis, to tell you and let you know that you're on the right track. In a work context, this is probably a little bit easier. If you're learning R by yourself, you may need to reach out to someone online, or it could be a case of joining groups or joining forums and asking questions and just getting that feedback from strangers, which can maybe be a little bit less reliable sometimes, but still helpful. But I think it's really helpful that having a growth mindset and a continuous learning framework for doing this, so that when you're coding, you're always trying to get better, trying to learn from what you're doing. Otherwise what happens, and it's something very common in coding, is that people will plateau. So they'll learn to a certain point and then they just won't really get any better because they won't be getting that external feedback to highlight where they could be getting better. Okay, finally, number 10. So number 10 is don't get overwhelmed. So if you are new to R, this might be the first time that you've been doing coding. Even if you're a developer, maybe this is just new to in terms of statistics. It's something that looks a little bit different. There's a huge amount out there. As I've said, I've used this software for a long time. I'm still learning things. So if you are a few weeks or even a few months into it, it's going to feel like there's so much that you don't know. But as you go along, as you're learning bits and pieces, really reflect on how much more you know now than you knew 2 weeks ago, a couple of months ago. And looking back at code snippets, this is yet another reason for saving your coding, is going back and looking at it, you'll see things and you go, wow, me from 6 months ago, here are things that I did that actually now I'm a much better coder. I know a lot more and I would do things a little bit differently. You might go and update and edit those code snippets, so if you do reuse them, they'll be even better next time. Okay, hopefully this was helpful. Hopefully there was some good tips in there to help you on your journey of learning R. Please like and subscribe if you're not already a subscriber, and I will see you back soon for more videos about R, data, statistics, education, and other random stuff.